I used to believe that every mistake had a way of fixing itself. That no matter how bad things got, time would smooth over the damage. But some mistakes don't fade. They don't disappear. They change you. They take pieces of you until you don't even recognize the person staring back in the mirror. I never expected my life to unravel the way it did. I never thought one small, seemingly innocent decision would set off a chain of events I couldn't control. But that's exactly what happened. At first, it was nothing, just a missing piece of clothing. Something I barely noticed. But looking back now, I realized that was the first crack in the foundation. The first sign that something was off. That something was coming. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about real destruction. It's slow. Subtle. Like a whisper before the scream. My stepson wanted some sugar. That's how this started. A moment I didn't think twice about. But what I lost in the process, it wasn't just a few missing items from my drawer. It was my peace. My marriage. My sense of self. I lost more than my underwear. I lost myself. Before I go any further, I need to make something very clear. This is not a story about excuses. It's not about justifying actions that should never have happened. It's about reflection. About the slow unraveling of choices we never meant to make. About guilt, regret, and the haunting realization that sometimes we are our own worst enemy. This story is not meant to glorify or romanticize infidelity. It's a confession, a personal reflection on how one decision, one moment of weakness, can spiral into something unrecognizable. If you're looking for easy villains and heroes, you won't find them here. There are no simple answers. Just the truth. If you had asked me years ago what kind of stepmother I wanted to be, I would have given you the perfect answer, kind but firm, supportive but not overbearing. I wanted to be the kind of woman my husband's kids could trust, the kind of person who made their home feel whole again. But reality doesn't always match our best intentions. My name is Harmony Walsh, and for the past several years, I have been the stepmother to two boys, Aiden and Isaiah. Their father, Bodhi, is my husband, the man I once believed I would grow old with. We met in a time when love felt easy, when passion wasn't something we had to chase or force. But time changes people. Marriage changes people. Bodhi and we started slipping away from each other long before I realized it. It wasn't one big moment. It was a series of small ones. The kind of distance that creeps in like a shadow, silent and unnoticed until one day, you wake up and realize the person lying next to you feels like a stranger. He was always busy. Work, stress, responsibilities. I understood. I told myself it was just a phase, that once things settled, we would find our way back to each other. But that day never came. And maybe deep down, I stopped waiting for it. Aiden was the older of my two stepsons, and from the beginning, he was different from his brother. He had a confidence about him, one that made people pay attention. He carried himself with a kind of ease, the kind of boy who could talk his way in or out of almost anything. People were drawn to him, and he knew it. Isaiah, on the other hand, was quieter. He was always watching, always listening. He had a way of making himself blend into the background, but I knew better. I knew he saw more than he let on. He was the kind of person who noticed the things no one else did, the pauses in conversations, the tension in a room, the secrets people thought they were hiding. I tried my best to be good to them, to be fair. I wasn't their mother, and I never tried to be. But I wanted them to feel safe with me, to know that I was in their corner, no matter what. And for a while, I thought I was doing okay. But there were cracks beneath the surface, cracks I ignored for far too long. And it all started with something so small, something I should have paid more attention to. The missing underwear. At first, I didn't think anything of it. A piece here, a piece there. Maybe I had mixed up the laundry. Maybe they were stuck somewhere in the back of a drawer. But then I started noticing a pattern. It wasn't just any underwear that went missing, it was the more delicate pieces. The ones I didn't wear every day. The ones I usually saved for, well, for moments that no longer existed in my marriage. That's when the discomfort settled in. Because losing socks or t-shirts, that was normal. But this felt different. It felt personal. It felt deliberate. I tried to push the thought away. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was looking for problems where there weren't any. But something inside me knew better. Something inside me was telling me that this was only the beginning. They say your gut always knows the truth before your mind is ready to accept it. Looking back, I think I knew, somewhere deep inside me, that something was wrong. But I ignored it. I gave myself 100 different excuses. I wanted to believe I was imagining things because the alternative was too uncomfortable to face. I started keeping track, though. Quietly. Subtly. I'd go through my drawers, mentally noting what was there, what was missing. And it was always the same type of clothing. Not the old, comfortable ones. Not the ones that could disappear into the laundry pile without a second thought. No, it was the delicate ones. The ones I barely wore anymore. The first few times, I convinced myself it was a mistake. Maybe I had misplaced them. Maybe they had gotten lost in the wash. I even started searching places I knew they wouldn't be, under the bed, in the closet, in the bottom of the hamper, because I was desperate for an explanation that made sense. But deep down, I knew this wasn't some accident. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that I was overreacting. And so, I let it go. I forced myself to let it go, until the day I couldn't anymore. It was a Saturday afternoon. Bodhi had taken Isaiah out for the day, and Aiden was home, locked in his room like he usually was. I was cleaning, keeping myself busy, because that's what I did when something was nagging at me. I distracted myself. But as I walked past Aiden's door, something made me stop. It was slightly open, just enough for me to see inside. Just enough for me to see my own clothing in his hands. I froze. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. Maybe it was something else. Maybe I was mistaken. But as I stepped forward, my stomach dropped. It was mine. I recognized it instantly. One of the pieces that had been missing for weeks. For a split second, I considered walking away, pretending I hadn't seen it. But I couldn't. My feet moved before my brain could stop them. I pushed the door open, and suddenly, Aiden and I were staring at each other, caught in a moment neither of us could take back. He didn't panic. He didn't try to hide it. He just smirked. Like it was funny. Like it was nothing. "Geez, stepmom, ever heard of knocking?" he said, tossing the fabric onto his bed like it was no big deal. I felt my face heat up, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I wanted to yell. I wanted to demand an explanation. But my voice felt stuck in my throat. Because what was I even supposed to say? What conversation prepares you for this? Why do you have that? I finally managed, my voice tight, controlled. Aiden just shrugged. "Relax. It's not a big deal." Not a big deal? My head was spinning. How could he be so casual about this? Did he not realize how inappropriate, how disturbing this was? "This isn't okay, Aiden," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You don't just take things like this." He leaned back against his headboard, completely unfazed. "Look, it's just curiosity. It's not like I'm hurting anyone." Curiosity. That's what he called it. Like he had borrowed a book from my shelf, like it was some innocent mistake. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to force him to understand how wrong this was. But instead, I just stood there, staring at the boy I had helped raise, the boy who had once been nothing more than my husband's son. And in that moment, he felt like a stranger. I should have said more. I should have made it clear that this was unacceptable. But I didn't. Because the truth was, I didn't know how to handle it. I wasn't prepared for this. So instead of facing it head-on, I did what I had become so good at doing in my marriage. I brushed it under the rug. This can't happen again, I said, my voice quieter now, more uncertain. Do you understand me? Aiden gave me a lazy smile, nodding like it was all a joke to him. Sure thing. Won't happen again. Chill out, Harmony. I didn't believe him. Not for a second. But I told myself I had handled it. That I had set a boundary. That this was over. I wanted to believe that so badly. After that day, I told myself it was over. I had confronted him. I had made it clear that it wasn't okay. That was supposed to be the end of it. But something felt off. The air in the house was different. There was a tension between us now, one that hadn't been there before. I noticed it in the way Aiden looked at me, not with guilt, not with embarrassment, but with something else. Something unreadable. Something that made my stomach twist in a way I didn't want to acknowledge. I told myself I was imagining it. That it was just the awkwardness of the situation, that things would go back to normal soon. But normal never came. The missing clothing stopped, at least. That should have been a relief. But instead of feeling like a problem had been solved, it felt like something had shifted. Aiden wasn't avoiding me, wasn't acting ashamed. If anything, he seemed more confident. More comfortable. Like he had found some sort of power in what had happened. I caught it in the little things. The way he held my gaze for just a second too long. The way his smile lingered after I spoke. The way his presence suddenly felt heavier when we were in the same room alone. But I ignored it. I ignored all of it. Because what was the alternative? To assume the worst? To admit that something had changed in a way I wasn't ready to face. I convinced myself that the best thing to do was move forward. To act like nothing had happened. I wasn't going to let this situation turn into something bigger than it was. I wasn't going to let it ruin the balance of my home. And most of all, I wasn't going to let it make things even more strained between Bodhi and me. So, when I found myself standing in front of Aiden one evening, making a decision I should have never made, I told myself I was doing the right thing. You're not going to take my things anymore, right? I asked, keeping my tone light, casual, as if this was just a normal conversation. Aiden smirked, tilting his head slightly. Nope. I told you, it was just a phase. No big deal. But I didn't believe him. Not completely. And maybe that's why I said what I said next. Look, if you ever need something, just tell me. You don't have to take things that aren't yours. The words tasted strange coming out of my mouth. Like I was giving permission for something I shouldn't have been. But at the time, I told myself it was nothing. That I was just keeping the peace, making sure this never became a problem again. Aiden studied me for a second, his expression unreadable. Then he shrugged. All right. Sounds fair. And just like that, the conversation was over. It felt easy. Too easy. Like I had somehow solved the problem without realizing I had just created a new one. At first, I thought it worked. The unease started to fade. The weird tension in the air softened. Everything felt normal again. But it wasn't normal. Not really. Because Aiden had changed. Just a little. Subtle enough that I could pretend I wasn't noticing it. But I was. He started leaning in closer when we talked. Started speaking to me in a way that felt different. Not inappropriate. Just comfortable. Too comfortable. And I let it happen. Because I had convinced myself that as long as we weren't talking about what had happened, as long as we were just existing like everything was fine, then it would be fine. I thought I was in control. I wasn't. If there was a single moment where everything truly changed, where I should have known, without a doubt, that I had already crossed a line, it was the message. It was late, past midnight. Bodhi was already asleep beside me, his back turned, his breathing slow and heavy. The kind of deep sleep that meant he wouldn't stir, wouldn't notice the glow of my phone screen lighting up the dark room. Initially, I didn't think anything of it. Just a notification. Probably an email. Or some spam message. But then I saw the name. Aiden. It wasn't unusual for him to text me, but this was different. There was no context, no words, just a video attachment. My stomach clenched as I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. Something inside me whispered not to open it. To just delete it, to pretend I never saw it. But I didn't. I told myself it was innocent. That it was a mistake, that maybe he had meant to send it to someone else. But when I clicked on it, I knew. I knew it wasn't an accident. I knew exactly what he was doing. My breath caught in my throat. My hands trembled slightly as I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process the reality of what I was looking at. And then, instead of deleting it, instead of being horrified, instead of waking Bodhi up and telling him everything, I hesitated. That hesitation was my downfall. Because in that moment, I wasn't just a stepmother dealing with an inappropriate situation. I wasn't just someone trying to keep the peace. I was something else. Something I didn't want to name. I closed out of the message, locked my phone, and lay there staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding. I told myself I'd delete it in the morning. That I'd never acknowledge it. That it didn't mean anything. But I didn't delete it. I let it sit there. Unopened again, untouched but still there. And that was the moment I knew I was already too deep in something I didn't understand. After that night, things didn't go back to normal. Not really. I wanted them to. I tried to act like nothing had changed, like I hadn't seen what I'd seen, like I hadn't hesitated the way I did. But the tension between Aiden and me became impossible to ignore. He didn't mention the message, didn't acknowledge it. But I knew he was watching me, waiting to see what I would do. And when I did nothing, when I acted like I had never received it, I think that was all the answer he needed. He became bolder. Not in obvious ways, but in the subtle shifts that only I could recognize. The way he stood just a little too close when we spoke. The way his hand would graze mine when passing by. The way his eyes lingered, filled with something unspoken, something heavy. I could feel it happening. I could feel the shift. And the worst part? I let it. Meanwhile, Bodhi was slipping further away. It wasn't just about us anymore. It was everything. He was tired, distracted, drowning in work and responsibilities. Some nights, he barely spoke to me at all. And when he did, it was brief, transactional. Did you pay that bill? Did you talk to the school? Did you pick up groceries? I wanted to fix it. I really did. I tried to pull him back, to make him see me again. I planned date nights, I tried initiating conversations, I even dressed up the way I used to when we were first married. But every time, the result was the same. A distracted nod, a tired smile, a distant kiss on the forehead before rolling over in bed, already half asleep. I was losing him. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to get him back. And then, when I felt loneliest, when I felt the most invisible, Aiden was there. The tension wasn't just in my head anymore. It was real, palpable, something neither of us spoke about, but both of us understood. And still, I did nothing. Then came the night that changed everything. It was supposed to be a normal trip. A weekend visit to Bodhi's family. Isaiah had already gone ahead with his father, but Aiden and I had stayed back an extra day due to conflicting schedules. The plan was simple. We'd drive up together in the morning. But things never go according to plan, do they? A last-minute work emergency delayed me. The drive took longer than expected. By the time we were on the road, it was late and I was exhausted. My body felt heavy, my eyelids kept fluttering shut. It wasn't safe to keep driving. Aiden was the one who suggested stopping at a hotel for the night. "It's just one night," he said, shrugging. "No big deal." And I agreed, because at the time, it wasn't a big deal. It was practical. It made sense. I was too tired to argue. The hotel was small. Just a simple roadside stop. I checked us in, grabbed the key, and walked into the room, only to realize too late that there was just one bed. I hesitated. I almost went back to the front desk to ask for a different room. But Aiden had already thrown his bag onto the chair, already kicked off his shoes. "It's fine," he said. "I don't mind sharing." And again, I let it happen. I barely remember falling asleep. The exhaustion took over the second I hit the pillow. But what I do remember is waking up. At first, I wasn't fully aware of what was happening. My mind was foggy, still trapped somewhere between sleep and wakefulness. But I felt warmth, a presence, the heavy weight of an arm draped over my waist, the quiet sound of breathing, too close, too intimate. And then I realized Aiden was behind me. Close, too close. I was frozen, unsure if I should move, if I should say something. My body tensed, but my mind was sluggish, slow to catch up. Then, slowly, I felt something else. The soft brush of fingers against my skin. A shift in the way he held me. A silent question, an unspoken invitation. For a split second, I didn't breathe. I didn't move. My thoughts were racing, colliding into each other so fast I couldn't make sense of them. And then, just like the night I received his message, I hesitated. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was the fact that for the first time in so long, I felt seen. I felt wanted. But instead of pulling away, instead of saying his name and ending the moment before it could go too far, I did nothing. I told myself I was imagining it. That I was still half asleep, that none of this was real. That if I didn't acknowledge it, it wouldn't mean anything. And so I closed my eyes. And I let myself believe the lie. It was nothing. Just a mistake. Denial is a strange thing. You think you're in control of it, that as long as you don't say something out loud, as long as you don't name it, then it isn't real. But reality doesn't care about silence. And the truth has a way of slipping through the cracks, no matter how hard you try to contain it. After that night in the hotel, everything changed. Or maybe it had already changed, and I was just finally starting to see it. Aiden had always been bold, but now it was something else. Something deliberate. He wasn't just pushing boundaries, he was testing me, waiting to see how far I'd let things go. And the worst part? I wasn't stopping him. It started with the way he spoke to me. The shift was subtle at first, words laced with something heavier, something meant just for me. "You look different today, Harmony," he'd say, his voice low, casual. "More relaxed. You should smile more. I like it when you do. It's funny, you and Dad barely talk anymore. What do you guys even do when Isaiah and I aren't around?" Little comments, each one inching closer to a line that I should have drawn in stone. But instead of shutting him down, I let them pass. Maybe I told myself he was just joking. Maybe I thought if I ignored it, he'd stop. But I knew better. I knew he was waiting for a reaction. And every time I stayed silent, I gave him one. Then came the way he looked at me. Not like a stepson. Not like someone who saw me as part of his family. His gaze lingered too long, like he was memorizing something. Like he knew a secret no one else did. He was too comfortable now. Too confident. And it wasn't just him. It was me, too. The way I let the moment stretch out between us. The way I allowed the silence to speak when I should have filled it with distance. With rules. With boundaries that should have never been crossed. And then, the moment I had been pretending wouldn't come. The moment that shattered the illusion I had built for myself. It happened fast. Too fast for me to stop it, too slow for me to pretend I didn't see it coming. It was an ordinary evening. Bodhi was out late again, probably buried in work, and Isaiah was upstairs in his room. Aiden and I were in the kitchen, talking nothing serious, just idle conversation. But the way he stood close, the way his voice dipped into something familiar, something dangerous, made my heart race in a way I didn't want to admit. And then he reached out. A touch, small, fleeting, but unmistakable. His fingers brushed against mine as he took the glass from my hand, his eyes locked onto mine in a way that sent a slow, creeping heat through my body. I should have pulled away. I should have said something. But I didn't. And that's when I heard it. A quiet, sharp intake of breath from behind us. I turned too fast, my stomach plummeting before I even saw his face. Isaiah stood in the doorway, his expression blank, too blank. His eyes flicked between us, his lips pressing into a tight, thin line. He wasn't a kid who spoke often, but when he did, his words always cut straight to the bone. And that's exactly what happened next. "Mom, what are you doing?" My breath caught in my throat. The room tilted. The walls felt too close. Isaiah's voice wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. It was steady, heavy with something I couldn't bear to name. Judgment. Disappointment. Knowing. Aiden didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just stood there, watching, waiting to see how I would handle it. To see if I would lie. If I would deny what had been brewing in front of us all this time. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because what could I say? How could I explain something I hadn't even allowed myself to understand? How could I look at Isaiah, this boy who had trusted me, who had accepted me as part of his life, and tell him that he was wrong? Because he wasn't wrong. He had seen the truth before I had even been willing to see it myself. And that was the moment. The moment I realized there was no going back. That I had let something fester for too long, let it grow into something I couldn't control. And now I had to face it. I had spent so much time convincing myself that I was in control. That as long as I didn't acknowledge it, I was safe. That as long as I told myself I was still the person I had always been, I hadn't really lost anything. But in that moment, looking at Isaiah, at the disappointment in his eyes, I finally understood. I had already lost everything. Guilt is a strange thing. It doesn't hit you all at once like a crashing wave. It seeps in slowly, creeping into the spaces you thought were safe. It lingers in the silence, in the moments between breaths, in the way people look at you when they think you don't notice. And worst of all, it never leaves. After that night, everything was different. Or maybe it had already been different for a long time, and I was just finally seeing it clearly. Isaiah didn't say anything else after that moment in the kitchen. He didn't have to. The damage was already done. And the way he looked at me, God, that look, was worse than anything he could have said. He didn't tell Bodhi. I knew that much. At least, not yet. But something changed between us. He stopped talking to me. Stopped meeting my eyes. He was always quiet, always observant, but now his silence felt heavier, like a wall had gone up between us that I had no way of breaking through. And honestly, maybe I didn't deserve to. Aiden didn't change, though. If anything, he seemed almost amused by it all. Maybe he thought Isaiah wouldn't say anything. Maybe he didn't care if he did. Either way, the tension between us remained, lingering like smoke in the air. We never talked about what happened that night in the hotel. We never talked about the way our dynamic had shifted, the way I had let it happen. And maybe that was the worst part, how easy it was to pretend, how quickly we fell back into the silence of everything unspoken. And then there was Bodhi. I wish I could say I fought for my marriage after that. That I tried to fix what had been broken between us long before Aiden ever became a problem. But the truth is, I didn't. Because deep down, I already knew it was over. Maybe it had been over for a long time. He still didn't see me. Or maybe, in some way, he did, and that's why he didn't ask questions. Maybe he felt the distance just as much as I did, but was too exhausted, too drained to do anything about it. Maybe he was just as guilty of letting this marriage die as I was. I stopped trying to reach him. Stopped trying to mend something that no longer existed. And in some twisted way, that made it easier. Because I could tell myself that I wasn't the only one who had failed. I used to think that love, real love, could survive anything. That no matter how many storms came, no matter how far two people drifted, if they wanted it badly enough, they could always find their way back to each other. But that's a lie, isn't it? Some love doesn't fade. It just rots, turning into something unrecognizable, something that poisons you from the inside out. And Aiden, he would always be a part of my story now. There was no erasing that. No undoing it. The reckless teenager I had once seen as just my husband's son was now a permanent scar on my conscience. A reminder of how easily I had slipped into something I swore I never would. But the worst part of all of this? It wasn't about Bodhi. It wasn't about Aiden. It wasn't even about Isaiah. The worst betrayal wasn't against my family. It was against myself. I spent so much time telling myself I was a good person, a good wife, a good stepmother. I told myself that I knew where the lines were, that I would never cross them. But in the end, I did. And I did it so slowly, so subtly, that by the time I realized how far I had gone, I had no idea how to find my way back. And the worst part? I don't even know if I regret it for the right reasons. Do I regret what happened? Or do I regret getting caught? Do I regret crossing the line? Or do I regret that I can never go back to the person I was before it all started? I don't have the answer. Maybe I never will. Sometimes, the worst mistakes don't destroy you all at once. They take pieces of you, bit by bit, until one day, you look in the mirror and realize you're already gone. If this story made you think, if it left you questioning, reflecting, or feeling something, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. This was one confession, but there are so many more. If you want to hear the next story, hit that subscribe button. You won't believe what's coming next.